Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett. I am joined by Tammy Melchien. Tammy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
All right, great is good. Great is great, actually.
It's better than good.
Yeah. We are starting over. We've got a whole new.
Oh.
No, I didn't mean.
Oh, okay.
I meant it's the name of the series. So, brand new series, and it's called Starting Over. And it is based on a book by none other than Dave and John Ferguson. So we're very excited about this series and very excited to be, really kind of in that, that on-deck spot after Show Up Sunday and after the Love Does series, after Celebration Generosity. November is a time where, people really are in their systems, their rituals for the fall. They're coming back to church. We get lots of great crowds. And it's a great opportunity to be able to share this series.
Although we hope they come for the weeks that are in October.
We do too. But I'm just talking about if you look at the patterns, November is a very good time as it relates to church attendance.
Okay.
Right? Fair?
I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Tammy, talk to us just a little bit about this series. We've got 5 weeks to cover, so brevity is the soul of wit. We definitely recommend that everyone read the book. Reading the book would be a good thing in preparation for this experience. And tell us a little bit about how the series is going to accompany the themes of the book.
Okay. Well, if you remember from Finding Your Way Back to God, how we talked about the 5 awakenings, one of the things Dave and John make a case for this book or point out is that a lot of people awaken to regret and then seem to get stuck there, stuck in what we call the sorry cycle, where it's this longing and regret, and they get stuck there. And so this series is about helping us learn to see our regrets as like the starting point, not where we have to stay, as a starting point in order to move beyond them and to have a fresh start. So we're going to kind of work through that in 5 weeks. What we're doing biblically with this is we're looking at narratives where we're bookending week 1 and week 5 with Peter and Paul, but in the middle is the story of David.
Okay.
So 3 weeks of David in the middle.
All right. And so, in some ways it's a sequel to Finding Your Way Back to God, but it's really kind of like taking one of the pieces of it and expanding it and exploring that topic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Life beyond regret. All right, well, let's dive into week 1 then, as we're going to focus in on Peter and what's going on with him. And this week is called Loving Your Regrets.
Yes. And when we look at Peter, you may remember that, I think it was in the hashtag My Story series just a little bit ago, we did tell the story of Peter's failure. We looked at Peter and Judas. So we're revisiting that, but we're gonna not really focus on the denials. We're going to focus more on how Jesus helped him move beyond regret. So not the passage about where he denies Jesus. We'll allude to that. We'll mention it. But we're going to focus more on John 21 and how Jesus restores him. And so a big part of this is just introducing this whole series. We'll be introducing the sorry cycle here. And we'll be talking about these 3 different types of regrets that we tend to have. Regrets of action, of inaction, and of reaction. And, in the beginning of the message, we'll hopefully help everyone get in touch with something that they regret. But then as we look at the story of Peter, what we're going to draw out of John 21 there, we've already brainstormed this one. So what we're going to draw out of that passage, that interaction with Jesus and Peter, is that Jesus does 2 things to help Peter begin to move beyond his regret. One, he kind of confirms their relationship, the "do you love me" part. And he also confirms, I don't know if this is a word we'll use, but he confirms Peter's calling that, feed my sheep.
Right.
And the idea that what Jesus did for Peter, he also wants to do for you and I. He reaches out to us and says, I love you, you love me. Like, he affirms that relationship. What happened, whatever that thing is you regret, it doesn't have to stand between us. And also, I have plans and purposes for you. This is not the end of your story. And so that's how we're coming at this. The title of this one is Loving Your Regrets, because basically we want to get people to see that I'm trying to remember the phrase. Regret is actually a I can't remember the exact phrase we're going to use, but it's a constructive emotion in that, like, it can move us forward in a positive way.
Right.
And so that's where we're hoping people land at the end of this, is to say, okay, all this stuff that I've been carrying, I don't know quite know how to move through it yet, but yet I can see this as a starting point for moving forward.
Yeah, and loving your regrets is as much about the fact, like, thankfully I acknowledge I have a regret.
Yeah.
Because that allows me to move forward. I'm not in denial about what took place.
Yes.
I'm not, I'm in a position where I can move forward.
Yeah. And we have a great quote that I think is also in the book, that basically the only way to, like, everybody has regrets. The only way you could not have regrets is if you were, like, brain damaged. So if you don't want to have regrets, I think she says your only option is a lobotomy.
Yeah, well, so you know who you are, I guess, if you don't have any regrets. All right, well, let's move on then to week 2, and then this begins kind of the process of delving into David's story.
Yes.
And we're recognizing our regrets. This is kind of really what we were just talking about, like the moment, right?
Yes.
The moment of recognizing your regrets and how important that is.
So, if in week 1 we get you saying, okay, this is a starting point, now how do I go forward? Weeks 2, 3, and 4 are sort of the moves of how to move forward.
Right. And we're talking about breaking the sorry cycle.
Yes.
Instead of going back to longing and back to regret and back to longing, we're breaking through.
Yes.
Okay.
So the first thing is to recognize your regrets. And, so many times we do deny, or we suppress, or we distract ourselves and don't deal with it. Mm-hmm. And this message, what we're trying to just get people at the point of, they are recognizing, they are naming, they are owning their regret. And so we're going to use the story of David. Obviously David messed up in a big way. I'd say adultery and having someone murdered. That's
like covering it
frowned
up,
upon.
Covering up with murder. It was bad.
It's bad.
Yeah.
So
and he didn't steal it. Well, no, he stole. Okay, I was just trying to go through the 10 Commandments.
But anyway, when you first go through that story, he's basically just kind of going on with his life as if nothing happened. He's in denial, suppressing it, until the prophet Nathan comes and exposes him. But one of the things we're going to do in this message is we have 2 object. Can I go into this detail? Would that help?
Sure.
We're going to have 2 object lessons that when you have regret, which we've already established all of us do, you sort of have 2 options. And the first object lesson is the idea of, like, a beach ball that you're trying to put underwater, that you can try to suppress it and hide it and push it down. Now, it probably always from time to time pops up, but still we can get pretty good at that. Yeah. And David was pretty good at that. But when the prophet comes and confronts him, then he's got the choice again. He can either try to go back and keep hiding it. He could have had this guy eliminated, for nobody would still ever know.
Right.
But he makes the second choice, which is the choice we're going to try to encourage one another make too. He decides to recognize it and to acknowledge it, to bring it into the light. And so the second object is probably going to be a candle. And so we'll use that in a passage from Ephesians about, bringing things out of the darkness into the light, about how this part of it is about telling yourself, this is my telling God, and also telling someone else, so that you really recognize and get this thing out in the open.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's and obviously a big step in being able to get to the point where you're acting differently, I guess.
And we want a response moment there in this message that we'd love your help brainstorming.
Absolutely,
and figuring that out.
Something, a way to symbolically represent
bringing things into the light.
To the light. No, that's good. Yeah, and as if you're following along at home and you're looking at kind of the map, this is probably the part now where it probably resembles a little bit more closely the description that you see on the map. The time that we're recording this, we're kind of in between brainstorming, right? So we've already started brainstorming a couple of these weeks. So when it comes to, like, brainstorming the ideas for those first 2 weeks, think more about the stuff that we're talking about, and maybe if there are things in the text here that don't match up, or think more about how we're talking about it, vocally. And then when we go into these 3 weeks, then we'll kind of be back in our regular rhythm, I
His
guess.
teaching
where
team has not done these
yeah,
3 yet.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll be brainstorming at the same time that teaching
Yeah.
team is for this. So week 3, then after we do in fact recognize them, then we need to release them, and that doesn't sound. I mean, obviously, I think this is probably the place where the cycle happens, is when we refuse to kind of release those regrets. So talk to us a little bit about, because this continues the David and Nathan story to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, which is going to be tricky. We're going to have to figure that out because this involves, like, I don't necessarily want to shy away from it, but you have to be really careful because this involves, like,
it's a pretty horrific
a
part
baby
of,
dying type of a deal. But also an interesting thing in that you see David like before the child dies, like grieving and pleading and not eating and all that, and then the child, passes, and then he like cleans up, takes him, and his servants are going, "What is the deal with you?" But it's almost like this kind of point where he reaches, well, okay, I have to move forward, in this. So
and just backing up a little bit, the baby that we're talking about is the baby that was conceived in the adultery.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yeah. So it's going to be tricky to figure out.
And really, like, this is a part of the story that I don't think gets told very often.
No.
It's probably a part of the story that people don't even know is a part of the story.
Yeah. So I mean, we will have to very delicately deal with that part of the story, but a lot of the focus on this week, I think, is going to be more on the Psalm 51, because that's where you can see, David saying, "Wash away my iniquity. Against you have I sinned." And so part of this, I don't know that this is in the map, but I just heard Dave Ferguson in the meeting talk about, like, part of this releasing is like forgiving yourself, forgiving other people, forgiving, and so a lot of this involves some of that.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Oh, is
the
that in
question 1 and 2, and
okay.
when you regret it on your own terms, then you're asking forgiveness, kind of forgiving ourselves, and then that next step, do I need to ask forgiveness of someone else, outside?
Yeah. So this is going to be a lot about just, letting go.
Yeah.
Learning to let go of that.
Mm-hmm. That's not easy.
No, it's not.
Is what I found or read about in books. It's never been my own experience. For reals. Week 4, then, after we have figured out what it looks like to release those regrets, then we're going to try to redeem our regrets.
Yes. And sticking with now, and this goes different than what's in the book, if you're following with the book, but we wanted to continue this narrative going. And so what we looked at was, you see David then, okay, so he's, had this moment where he came clean. He's had to work through, in Psalm 51, you see him really working through the emotional side of releasing it. But then, as the story continues with, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, who, then continues to be his wife. Well, eventually God gives them another child that is Solomon. And, you see Solomon go on to be, considered the wisest man that ever lived. He's the one who God used to build the temple, and then you follow that line on through. Eventually you get to Jesus. And so you look at that and you say, okay, even out of this thing that, David did that was wrong, how God can still bring something very beautiful and purposeful and good out of it. And that's how we allow God to work. So, I mean, I think the heart of this is the concept behind Romans 8:28, that God can work all things for the good. And so how can he take even our greatest regrets and use them for a purpose?
Yeah, and it shows up in all sorts of different ways. But at the end of that sentiment is, what does it look like for me to completely trust in God? And I think you had the passage in there where David actually says to Bathsheba, Solomon will be the king. There were other options, there were other sons. And really just the idea of trusting God and partnering with him in that moving past, and seeing what he will do to redeem it. I find that, like, I think that's I don't know, it becomes a very difficult part of it's where you can really get stuck in the cycle, because you start to second guess and start to ask yourself, well, I mean, could this really have been, part of the plan, or, was this a part of the plan all along? And it becomes a lot less about that, and it really becomes about what it looks like for God's grace to pick us up where we are when we've released these things, and to be able to move forward from them. And it is when those things happen, and we've seen it time and time again in these stories of people finding their way back to God. They have released these regrets, and even in the midst of things that are still broken and messy, God is doing amazing things. All right, so then we get to week 5, and we're wrapping up the series, and so we've hit kind of these 3 R's that are getting us, kind of in an action step towards breaking out of the sorry cycle. So now we're living beyond your regrets. And where are we headed with this week?
Yeah, in some ways I feel like this week might almost be a little bit of a, whereas the first week was an introduction, this is kind of like tying it all together type of week. And so if you look in the book too, in the beginning, you have got this picture of the sorry cycle, where in the end we bring that graphic back, and it's added where you can see these recognize, release, and redeem as a part of that's what helps us move it out. And a big part of this one is also recognizing that it's not a one-time fix, but something that we may have to continue to do, to recognize, redeem, and release. And for this, we're going to use the story of Saul, Paul. But we actually are not using the narrative when his conversion happened. We're actually using a passage from Acts 22 where he describes it.
He's telling his story.
Because it does one of two things for us. One, he tells his own story, so we still get what happened, that he was this awful,
right. Why are you
violent
persecuting
man
me?
who was changed. But if you look towards the end of this passage, verse 17, he says, like, when I returned to Jerusalem, was praying at the temple, I found in a trance, and the Lord speaking to me, quick, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. And like, it was interesting that in verse 19, okay, so this is after he's been converted, after he's committed and all that, he's like, all of a sudden you can see this regret sneaking back in. Lord, these people know who I was, that I went from one synagogue to in prison. You see that, right. Even though Paul, you're like, man, I thought he was past that.
Right.
But there it is sneaking back in. But then I love the last line, God listens to that and then says to me, go.
Nice try.
So it's kind of like, even someone like Paul, like that, that sorry cycle is always like there, maybe, tempting us to get back engaged with it. But we need to continue to move forward and not get stuck in our regret.
And so would you say that and I mean, it still remains to be brainstormed, but would you say this is as much about the same, because in here he's talking about the same moment, they're the same topic or the same issue of regret. Do you feel like, from an application standpoint, are we talking about applying the cycle in our life so that the next time something happens, we're able to kind of move through this cycle in a positive way? Or is it really gearing towards the tendency that we would still have even after pushing through the cycle to get back into it with the same stuff?
Yes.
So yes, and
I think we haven't brainstormed it yet, but from my understanding so far of the book and that, I think it could be both.
Okay.
It's both this new pattern of recognizing, releasing, and allowing God to redeem is something, the next time we screw up, that we need that as a tool, but also if we feel ourselves getting pulled back into our old junk,
right.
To let that help us move through it again.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's a great series, and I think it's going to be, it may go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. I do think we will be looking towards story with regards to this series. We'll want to be able to share some unique, specific stories.
If you have any ideas of people that would fit with this.
Yes, I would love to hear them. A lot of us who are closer to the ground and right there on the front lines with people in the weekends and in the small groups, would love to hear those stories and be able to move forward with capturing some of them, however they may play themselves out. So be ready for that. Be thinking about brainstorms that make this highly successful, both in the large group and in the small group areas. And I think we've done it.
I think that's
Do you
it.
have anything else you have to add?
I thought you were.
Is it
wanting to shake
3:30
my
yet?
hand.
No, I wasn't, but I will. Is it 3:30 yet?
I don't know. Is it? I didn't get my steps in. I buzzed halfway through this,
that's
so
a problem.
I almost
All
walked
right.
in the back.
Well, maybe you can take a couple
But-
laps before you head home. All right. Well, this has been the Big Idea Podcast. This has been Tammy. I've been Eric, and we will see you next time. So long, everybody.